All right, hi there. We are going to go ahead and jump right in. I want to make sure I'm respecting your time, and I know a couple of you have to get started or have somewhere else to go soon. Let me go ahead, and I think I need to mute everybody as they go ahead. Sorry. All right, so you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. Here is our plan for today. We are going to begin by checking in about our course overall and following up on Module 3. Thank you so much to the 20 of you who filled out questionnaires. I really appreciate it. We'll then focus our attention on Module 4 and the unit assessment, which is your curriculum intervention, your final project for our class, before we wrap things up. In terms of Module 3, thank you so much for your feedback. Most of it was really positive. You said you really enjoyed this module and appreciated the opportunity to delve into your curriculum. I was delighted to see how many of you talked positively about what you learned from this analysis. Several of you in your analyses began to look forward towards this final project where you're thinking about, what am I going to do about this? How do I present this analysis to my peers, to my colleagues, to my principal? A couple of you asked for more direction for your analyses. You wanted to see samples, you wanted to know more of exactly what it was I was looking for, and we're going to keep working on this balance with the fourth module. Because each of you is looking at something different and doing an analysis and now an intervention in a different context about a personally relevant topic or question, I'm leery to give you too tight guidelines because I don't want you to be creating something for me and for my class, but rather creating something that's of real practical value in your day-to-day teaching, either now or the teaching that you hope to do in the future. So in this final project, I tried to step up the level of scaffolding you have for those that need it, but also to give you as much freedom as possible as you're designing your final intervention. In terms of the peer review, I had a couple of goals with this peer review. First, I wanted you to see different approaches to curricular analysis. Just as you looked at those session 8 readings where you saw different ways that published scholars and teachers were looking at analyses, I also wanted you to get a sense of the range of ways that people in this class were approaching this project, both within and across disciplines. And part of that was because I wanted you to see what makes for a compelling analysis. In your final project for our class, you'll be creating a proposal that my hope is you'll actually propose to some of the curricular decision makers in your school context, whether that's your grade level team, or it's the committee that you sit on that's working on curriculum, or it's your principal. Now, you won't be required to present that to anybody as part of your assignment for our class, but my hope is that what you're creating is something that has practical value to you in your school system. And so seeing what it was that made somebody else's analysis useful is the best way for you to think about how will you present your own argument in a way that it's comprehensible and compelling to somebody who's not you, who didn't just go through this process. I'd love any feedback that you have about the peer review process, and I'll pause for a minute in case you have any questions or comments or things you'd like to say about what it was like to review other people's papers, to make comments on it, and what have you. No? Okay, well, feel free to email me if you have anything you'd like to say. A few of you mentioned it in your questionnaires, and I ask about it specifically in our end of semester feedback as well. So don't hesitate to jump in if you have some questions there, or to contact me one-on-one. I'd certainly appreciate knowing about it. And your Module 3 assessments, your curricular analyses, will be returned tomorrow. So I have about half of them ready to go out, but I'd like to return them all in a batch. And I'll make sure that I post to the news site with some overarching comments, as I have for each of our prior assignments as well. So in terms of Module 4, this is our overarching flow. On session 11, we'll focus on choosing a topic for your final project. And for almost all of you, that will emerge directly from your Module 3 assessment. So whatever those recommendations are that you put in your assessment for your curriculum analysis, the hope is that in Module 4, you're able to build those out and actually begin doing some of this work. In session 12, you'll be delving into the literature on your topic, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. In sessions 13 and 14, which are blended because we have that week when Cal State Fullerton's closed. So this period spans from November 16th through November 30th. This is when you'll be really writing your final project and beginning to do some of that work. There's also what we're doing in this particular module is we'll have a formative peer review as part of this session, meaning that you'll get feedback from your peers about each of those criteria well before you actually have to turn your project in to me. So you went through the process this time at the end stage. In Module 4, you'll be doing that more in the middle when you have a working draft. In session 15, which is our last session, you'll present your near final work to your peers through a voice thread or other means of sharing that work in our discussion. And then your final assessment is due to me by 11:59 p.m. on Monday, December 12th, so after the end of our class. So you'll be working on your draft during sessions 13 and 14, sharing your near final project in session 15, and then after all of that, submitting it to me for my evaluation. So in terms of what our unit assessment looks like this time around, there are two major components to your final project, your curriculum intervention. The first of those is a rationale and literature review, and then the second is a curricular proposal. And I'll run through each of these in some depth, pausing for questions throughout. But again, don't hesitate to unmute yourself and jump in if you have any questions at all. So your rationale and literature review focuses on what you're proposing and why. So in this section, you'll talk about things like what the research says about your topic or curricular question. It's also important to know that your literature review is one of the key assessments for the master's program. So you may have noticed in the rubric for your final project, you have my standard rubric, and then there's a separate writing rubric. In the master's program, we're required to assess your writing in a formal way at multiple points throughout the program. And this portion of your literature review is one of those. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. In your curriculum proposal, this includes two parts. First is a stakeholder letter or presentation, which is a way of introducing your curricular proposal to your principal, to your department chair, to your fellow teachers, or so forth. And then there's the curriculum itself. For most of you, this would be the creation of a new or revised course or unit plan. But the form of your curricular proposal will vary according to what your research questions are. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what those might look like as they evolved out of your curriculum analyses, but we'll also talk about other possibilities for those of you that are interested. So let's look at that first part, your rationale and your literature review. The goal of this section of your paper is to answer the question, what are you proposing and why? The why portion must be research-based, that is grounded in published scholarship in your field. For example, perhaps this is the beginning of your paper. With the implementation of NGSS, many schools are struggling to develop new curriculum that aligns to new standards. In this intervention, I propose a new unit on XYZ, which has been designed to reflect NGSS's emphasis on LMNOP. This unit is grounded in existing research on teaching ABC, which indicates WZZ. Your literature review would then synthesize your findings. What did you find about this topic in the literature? Another possibility would be something like, in 2015, XYZ district transitioned to a new ABC assessment format. While there are many positive aspects of this shift, including LMNOP, there are also concerns about XYZ. Based on my analysis of TUV, I propose the addition of a DBQ to assess student learning regarding XYZ. In the pages that follow, I evaluate existing research related to XYZ before presenting my proposed DBQ. So here, the emphasis in your rationale and literature review, again, is what are you suggesting and why? In the literature review itself, what I'd suggest you do is that you begin by looking at the recommendations from your Module 3 curriculum analysis. Most of you came up with a list of 3 or 4 concrete recommendations. Tease out one of those and focus your Module 4 assessment on that so you're filling a real gap or meeting a real need in your school context. Use your literature review to delve into the research about that topic. I also suggest that you do your literature review first and then come back and write the introduction that frames your review. And in just a moment, I'll talk about the criteria for your review, how many sources, things like that. Now, in the Module 3 assessment, I asked you about your comfort using the library databases. Of the 20 of you that answered the survey, 19 of you said that you were at least very comfortable, if not an expert, in using the library systems. One of you said you'd never done this before. So if that was you, touch base with me if you need help. I'm happy to walk you through the way to use the systems, or our librarians are wonderful at chatting with you online about the databases and can answer a lot of questions and help you find the information you need. There's also a website that was created for students in EDSC 501, and I strongly encourage you to go to that website. There's a link here, and there's also one up on our Titanium site. And that'll bring you directly to the databases that you'll find most relevant, as well as some guidance on how to do an annotated bibliography or a literature review. I strongly encourage you to use headings to organize your review around key themes. For example, if you're thinking about principles of culturally responsive mathematics, inquiry-driven approaches to teaching geometry, and so forth. Now, there's a week in Module 4 where you're going to be organizing your materials graphically, either by creating a poplet or putting together an outline to help you get a sense of what it is that you found and what you still need to look for. But you may also want to think about using headings in your paper itself as a way of organizing your ideas. In terms of the criteria for Part 1, and then I'll stop and answer any questions you have. What I'll be looking for here is that your rationale is compelling and well-grounded. So that is your rationale, it makes sense why you're proposing this, and it's connected to the literature. For your lit review itself, it should be comprehensive and well-organized. It needs to be accurate, including both analysis and synthesis, not just a summary of your sources. What that means is that you're looking at themes or tensions and so forth across your sources, not presenting a laundry list of articles. If, for example, you're looking at the benefits of adding document-based questions to your curriculum, you're not going to say, well, so-and-so said this about document-based questions, and so-and-so said this about document-based questions, and so-and-so said this, but instead you're saying document-based questions are known to increase students' critical analysis of primary sources. For example, here's what the research said, or here's what this other researcher said. You're really focusing on the themes and weaving together those sources across those themes. In terms of the scope of your review, you're required to have a minimum of 8 scholarly sources, including 6 outside, that means non-course related sources. What do we mean by scholarly? We're talking about peer-reviewed sources or sources that are authored by discipline-specific professional associations, NCTE, NCTM, AFCTL, I always get that acronym wrong, and so forth. Your sources can include both pedagogical and content-related scholarship. That means you can either be thinking about how to teach inquiry in physics, so a pedagogical article about teaching, or some texts about the content itself. If, for example, you're building a new curricular unit about culturally responsive mathematics, maybe you're looking at content about culturally responsive mathematics, or if you're building a history unit about a topic that's not addressed in your current text materials, maybe some of your sources are the primary source documents themselves that students will be working with. If you have any questions at all about whether something meets the criteria for scholarly, don't hesitate to email me or post it to our discussion board. I'd much rather have you ask early and often than at the end find out, oh wait, this wasn't necessarily a scholarly source. But generally, if it's in a peer-reviewed journal or it's authored by one of your professional associations, you know that it counts as a scholarly source. The final way that you'll be evaluated for Part 1 is that your use of standard academic English and APA format. This literature review is something that you should be thinking of as scholarly writing, just as you would for your final projects within this master's program overall. I'll pause here for a moment to see if anyone has questions before moving on to the curriculum proposal section of the assignment.
I just had a question about what you expect for the final product here. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the stakeholder letter and the actual curriculum. Mm-hmm. You're expecting both of those things with the literature review, right? Yep,
so that's the second half of your project, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So this is Part 1, which is the lit review and the rationale. Part 2 is the curriculum itself. So think of Part 1 as the why are you doing what you're doing, and Part 2 is what you're actually doing.
And we're going to presumably create a stakeholder letter with that, what we're actually doing.
Yeah, your stakeholder letter is a way of introducing what you're doing to your principal. You wouldn't hand to your principal, here's my 8-page literature review. Maybe you'd write a 250-word letter to your principal saying, I'd like to suggest we add this particular thing. There'll be a lot of overlap, I imagine, between your stakeholder letter and your literature review. Your stakeholder letter should come out of what you found in your lit review, but will be designed for the peers at your school. And I'll talk more about that in the next part. But really I expect the stakeholder letter will be different for every student depending upon what you would actually share with your peers. Do you present a 5-minute presentation at your department meetings? In that case, the presentation would be your stakeholder letter. Is it an email that you're writing to somebody in the district? The email would be that stakeholder letter. So it's whatever you would actually do to bring this to the people in your local context.
All right.
I have a question.
Sure.
What do you mean by 6 outside non-course related sources?
That means that I didn't assign them.
You did. Okay. So non-text, basically.
No, they can be from anywhere, from the library databases, from journals. I just mean it's not Gladhorn. It's things that you found from some
right. Or the ancillary articles that you've used.
Right, that you found them on your own.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Any other questions about part 1? Hi, Tara.
Hi. Can I, I don't want to take everyone's time. At the end, can I just ask you, you had given me a really good idea of how, instead of doing completely different research while I'm doing my literature review for Dr. Street's final curriculum project, and I don't remember what we had come up with. Can I talk to you after about that?
Yes, and we'll do that actually towards the end after I talk about part 2, because I think other people may have that same question. Okay. And so remind me to pull that up with you. All right. So I will go ahead and move forward here, but again, please don't hesitate to jump in. So part 2 is your curriculum intervention itself. Now, this is the section of your paper that's going to be much more different person to person. Pretty much everyone's going to do something similar for part 1. You're all going to have a literature review. You're all going to have a research-based rationale. But in part 2, it's going to vary significantly according to what you're actually proposing. There are 2 components to this part of your intervention: your stakeholder introduction and your curriculum intervention. Your stakeholder introduction is designed to introduce your intervention to your principal, to your department, to the committee to whom you're proposing it, and so forth. You should choose a format that suits your audience. If that's a letter, if that's a presentation, if that's an email, this is something that should be concise, 250 to 500 words, and written in the tone that you would use when talking to the people to whom you would present this. So it's something that if you typically communicate in a more casual format with your peers at your school, then it's appropriate to do so here. If you're submitting a formal letter to your school board, then it would be something much more formal. But again, this is something that, write it the way you actually intend to use it if you were to make this proposal. And so there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what that looks like, depending upon the needs of your particular school environment. For those of you that aren't currently teaching, think of this as if you are writing a letter to a principal or presenting it during a job interview. This is what I would change and why. There are also a couple of you that are thinking about creating curriculum, not necessarily for your school, but to propose to a national audience. So if you were thinking about writing a query letter to an editor, for example, saying, I'd like to propose this unit for inclusion in your next textbook, this could be the letter that you are writing there. Again, if you're doing something really different or innovative for your curriculum proposal, don't hesitate to talk to me about what you're thinking about for your stakeholder introduction. And there'll certainly be opportunities to have some of this conversation through our discussions in the coming weeks. But the intent of this is that it's something that's practically useful to you in your local environment. The other and more significant portion of your intervention is the intervention itself. And again, you have lots of latitude on the form and format of your intervention. Use the format that's used in your school or district. If you're creating or revising a unit plan, creating or revising a course, keep it real. Use the type of documents that you actually use in your school district. Some of the suggested elements. If you're creating a new or redesigned course, you may want to put together the quarter or semester-long scope and sequence, your 1 to 2 page overview of each unit with some of the descriptions of the major assessments, and then optional supplementary resources, a couple of lesson plans to show what you're thinking about. Some of you have talked about saying we need to totally overhaul this curriculum. In that case, you would have something that's broader, but not necessarily as deep. I don't expect you to have lesson plans for every day of an 18-week or a what have you course. That's an unrealistic expectation for where we are here. But think about what you need to effectively convey that this is the course you're proposing. This is what it will look like. Here's how it aligns to the key standards. Here are a couple of examples. Think about what it is that your principal or departmental team would need in order to evaluate your proposal. If you're thinking about a new or redesigned unit, You might have a UBD style overview, a detailed daily calendar, copies of your key assessments, some of the unit handouts, 3 to 5 sample lessons. Again, think about the ways that this information would be used. What would you hand to the other teachers in your grade level team if you're thinking about aligning together? If you have another type of intervention, for example, some of you have talked about designing comprehensive text sets with some document-based questions. Other people have talked about creating supplementary electronic textbooks to supplement the materials that your district's created. Email me your ideas for what you want your intervention to look like and what those proposed components would be, as early as possible, but no later than November 15th. You're going to want to make sure that you have written agreement from me by November 15th that yes, what you're proposing meets the requirements for our assignment. And that's really just to protect you so that you don't go through the second half of our course, all from November 15th through December 12th, working on something that doesn't actually fit the expectations for this assignment. So again, I'm very open to considering your proposals. Most of you will end up doing a course or a unit plan because that's most of what you talked about in your analyses. But if you have other questions, you are certainly welcome to do so. I'll pause here. I see, Larry, you have a raised hand.
Yeah, I was out for a second, but what is UBD?
Understanding by design. So the backwards design. And I can put up a template for folks, but whatever, again, use whatever format it is that your school or district uses. Out of curiosity, I'm so new to California. How many of you have to create UBDs when you're proposing units? In both Chicago and both Illinois and Massachusetts, everybody had to for every unit. Do you do that here?
I've never had to do one.
Really?
Honestly, I don't have a clue what it is.
Oh, well then don't do it.
I know what it is because in the credential program, I remember having a book that was actually titled that. And
Understanding by design.
Yeah. And they encourage the backwards planning, et cetera, but I'm not the one creating the units or curriculum, so I don't really have to create any, I guess.
Okay.
I do have a question though. If we did a pacing guide and we want to rehaul the pacing guide and have the ideas of what it will look like, would it be okay if the new artifacts that are included are specifically focused on one of those units, or do you want us to do the entire thing?
Well, you have to think about what would make something like that compelling for a principal. So if you're doing an overhaul of a pacing guide, because you're thinking about moving to thematic curriculum, am I remembering that right?
Right. So instead of a chronological approach where we're going by the textbook of, have chapter 7 done by this or that, the idea is more so a month focused on African Americans all the way back from when slavery first began and the expeditions all the way to like now and Black Lives Matter.
Okay. Well, so maybe what you would do in a case like that, just like you would for a course proposal, is you'd have, say, a one-page overview of each of your major thematic units and then delve into one of them with a couple of sample lessons or a couple of sample artifacts so that it's clear.
So I was thinking, I understood the sample artifact. Okay, so that part I was asking about, just like I could come up with the artifacts and the documents that would be used for that theme. But you want me to do a proposal for every single one of the units?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about, say, an 18-week course, you'd want to have a couple of details about what those are, enough for people to understand what it is you're thinking about and talking about.
So that 250 to 500 words is for each one, or you want that to include all of them?
Are you talking about the stakeholder introduction?
I'm messing up on something then.
Okay.
What were you just saying to include?
So if you think about a pacing guide. So if you think about a pacing guide, think about the format of your current pacing guide. It has some details about each of the different sections that you're moving through. You'd still be creating the pacing guide that had each of that level of shallow.
Yes.
And then you'd have the artifacts just for the one that you're.
Right. I thought you were saying an entire like introduction or overview about all of them. Okay, I get it. Okay, awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, I'll move forward, but don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. In terms of the criteria, so how you'll be evaluated for part 2, your overall plan, I'll be looking for it to be comprehensive, cohesive, and compelling. So again, that idea that you are thinking broadly about this topic, but that it's cohesive. The different parts of it are connected to piece by piece, and that it's reflecting those values and ideals that you talked about in your rationale. Speaking of which, the alignment to your rationale and literature review is important in this assignment. Are you doing what you say you're going to do? I'm not going to take your unit and compare it to all of the standards in your discipline. Instead, what I'm going to do is take it and compare it to what you said your goals were and what you said the research said in that first part. So make sure that there's a connection between your rationale and literature review and the actual curriculum that you create. Again, you're looking here for alignment between your vision and best practices as you name them and your curriculum plan itself. In terms of your stakeholder introduction, again, here, this is something that's concise and compelling. Does it speak to the audience you're intending to speak to? And then finally, in terms of the instructional approach, is it creative? Is it cohesive? Is it complete? And is it academically appropriate? And again, that'll be a different thing for each one of you. And that's part of why it's so important that you, if you're doing something other than a unit or a revised unit or a revised unit plan or a new unit or a new semester plan, that you email me to get a sense of this is what you're planning to do. You have agreement that, yes, you met your goals and you included all of the elements that were required for that particular project. And then finally, the last criteria is that it's professionally presented. This product should look like something that you can walk into the day after class is over and hand to one of your colleagues or hand to your principal and say, hey, I have this idea. What do you guys think? And that certainly is the hope, that what you're creating is something that is school ready for your own context. In terms of collaboration, you are welcome to collaborate with a peer on this project. There are lots of ways to structure that collaboration. The first two, the two that came to mind for me, you could have two teachers co-author an intervention, co-writing both the literature review and the curriculum itself. For example, some of you work together on your curriculum analysis. You both teach 10th grade in the same discipline. You decide you're going to create this particular unit. And what you do is you do your entire project together. In this case, you would have the same grade for the entire project, and you would both have to take ownership over all of it. Another option would be for two teachers to co-author an intervention, writing the literature review together, but then creating different curricular products. For example, if you wanted to work with somebody who teaches in a different grade or subject area with you and wanted to create complementary curricular units, you might do your lit review, write your rationale together, but then you would each create something that you would actually use in your local context. And in this case, you would have the same grade for the first half of your project, but different grades for the second half. The one suggestion I'll make if you decide to go this route is to make sure that your individual second half aligns to your joint first half. That's somewhere that I've sometimes seen pairs of students run into trouble. They write something together and then act as if their curricular product is something entirely separate. So you'll just want to make sure that you have that alignment throughout. You might have some other idea for how you want to collaborate with somebody that I didn't think of. You're certainly welcome to consider that. Just email me to let me know what your ideas are so we can touch base about it. And do let me know if you plan to work with someone on your intervention so I can make sure that our grouping throughout the semester or throughout the remainder of the module reflects that you're working together and I don't have you overlapping in the wrong places. Any questions on this?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm thinking about my curriculum analysis that I did, and can I deviate from what I did for this project because I don't know if I could completely write a unit for what I analyzed. Does that make sense?
It does. So you can. It's up to you. If you want to do some brainstorming separately about if it's possible to work on what you worked on for your analysis, I'm happy to help you with that. I designed these to build upon this to build upon Module 3, but it's not required. I'm not going to go back to your Module 3 and say, oh, you didn't do exactly what you said you were going to do. So it's more that if that sparked a question for you, great. And if there's something else you want to focus on, we can talk about that too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So this might be a good place to come back to Tara's question, unless other people have questions so far. All right. Oh, let me talk about the rubric, Tara, and then I'll come back to that point that you had about how might this dovetail with your final project. So your rubric, it is up on Titanium in the same place. This is going to pull it open from my, let's see, resume share, stop share. Let me start sharing the right window with you. go. Okay, can you all see the final project description and rubrics? Yes? Okay. So here we are. This is available on Titanium. I just opened it up from my desktop because it's easier here. So you'll notice that as before, there's a very comprehensive description of what it is you're working on here and approximately what word counts might be for each section. Again, I don't count words. However, students typically ask, what are you looking for here? So you have a general sense of what we're looking for. I have additional details, some questions to help guide you and encourage you to think about it throughout. You'll notice that your rationale and literature review collectively count for half of your grade for this project. Now, a couple of things to think about. So your rationale certainly can build upon the ideas you explored in this course, for example, your philosophy paper or your curricular analysis, but should be a standalone paper. So don't assume that the reader has already read your Module 3, though I certainly have. And if you want to cite your findings from your Module 3 assessment, you would just cite yourself. And so as noted in the analysis conducted by Dover 2016, so on and so forth. And in terms of writing in first and third person, there may be a paragraph or two at the beginning or end of your paper that's written in the first person. The bulk of your rationale and literature review should be written in APA style using a third person scholarly voice. So when you're analyzing other people's scholarship and other people's research, you'll speak about it in the third person. In terms of your curriculum intervention, this is all things that I talked about in the presentation, but you have some more details here regarding them. And I'm going to bring us over towards the rubric. So this is the rubric. Yes.
Dr. Dover, sorry, can you scroll back up? I was like trying to scroll and I'm like, wait, I have no control.
You don't have control, yeah.
Can you go back up? You had said something in the very last thing before the third person part. You said some of it might be, you were relating it back to our original rationales and things. What were you saying about that?
I was saying that you are welcome in your rationale to build upon the ideas you've talked about in other places in our course, but that this needs to be a standalone paper. So don't assume that somebody's read your entire curriculum analysis in writing this paper to create.
I see what you're saying. In the rationale portion, though, can we be using some things? I don't know. Would you consider I don't want to consider that plagiarism, but because we've done so much on the rationale as to why we got to where we are now, would we be allowed to use some of that?
Yeah, you can cite it, certainly.
And you want us to cite ourselves?
You would cite yourself.
I've never done. Okay.
Yep. So, and that's actually one of the academic integrity policies of Cal State Fullerton, that you have to cite yourself if you're referencing back to previous work in any of your papers. So just to know that that's one of the plagiarism components. So if you ever have that question come up in other classes or on your comps or on your final project, make sure you talk to your advisor about it, if that's something that you're thinking of doing. So in terms of the rubric for this, you'll see that our rubric is just like each of the other ones, your rationale. I use very similar language, rubric to rubric. The thing that I want to point out is the place where we'll be using a rubric that's the Cal State Fullerton one. So if you notice here, this criteria for academic writing for your rationale and literature review, in order to get full credit, you need a composite score of 5 or 6 on the Cal State Fullerton writing assessment. Have you used that writing assessment rubric in other classes? This is what it is.
I don't think so.
No? Okay. So this is the official one that's been adopted by the master's program, and every student is required to be assessed using this particular rubric at multiple points throughout their program. And this particular assignment in this particular course is one of them. And the way that this is used is that this same rubric for writing assessment is used throughout the College of Education to ensure that students in all programs, in all graduate programs, are meeting their writing expectations. You need to earn a 4 or better to be identified as proficient. If there's any category of your academic writing that's considered less than satisfactory, it's a 4 or below, you'll be required to meet with a graduate program advisor to identify ways to improve and to get some additional support and tutoring. So this is the rubric itself. You'll see that in order to earn a 4, which is considered proficient, you're addressing the topic clearly, you have generally good presentation, your paper's effectively organized. The vast majority of you will have no problem meeting these criteria. the couple of you that I've talked to about issues of organization in your writing, or made a number of comments about ways in which you might want to work on structure, or you need to work on paragraphing, some of those things are the places where if you're somebody that struggles with writing, it's more likely that you'll get flagged on this particular assessment. Now you'll notice for your grade for our class, all of that writing stuff comes down to just 20% of your overarching grade for this assignment. However, if you do have less than a 4 on this particular rubric, we'll have to work with the advisor for the master's program overall to make sure that you get the support that you need to succeed in terms of academic writing. And it's really designed as an early warning system if there's anybody whose writing is at a level that we need to grapple with. So when you're getting your grades for this particular assignment, you'll get your overarching grade. If you have a 5 or a 6 on that writing assessment, you'll be in this category. If you have a 4, you'll be in this category. But then you'll also get a copy of your strict writing assessment so that you know exactly where you are for each one of these criteria. It's a little bit confusing in terms of the multiple layers of rubrics, but I want to make sure that you understand where your grade's coming from and then also what the purpose of this secondary rubric is. Does anybody have questions about that part? Okay. So in terms of the curricular intervention portion of your plan, so this is part B, the criteria are just as I mentioned before, the overall plan, your alignment, your stakeholder introduction, and again, it says here stakeholder letter, but if you're making a presentation, that would just be substituting the presentation here, the instructional approach, and then finally the format. And again, this full rubric is available for you up on Titanium, and don't hesitate to take a look at it and let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to pause here and bring us back over to the PowerPoint, and perhaps you have some questions that you'll ask along the way. Okay, do you all see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, thank you. And as before, let me take us back. So as before, late submissions are subject to a 5% penalty per day unless we've made alternate arrangements in advance. Don't make sure you email me and that you have a copy of my email back. So you have written confirmation if there's any kind of alternate arrangement. In terms of some closing tips, I'd encourage you to make sure you keep yourself on track and start thinking now about how to use your November recess effectively. As we move up towards this module, we have a lot of independence in this module. There are very few whole class readings. Most of your work is going to be working towards your literature review and then checking in, and I was careful to build in scaffolds for you throughout the module, where you're checking in, you're sharing what you've already found in the literature, you're asking questions, you're sharing your process along the way. We have that formative peer review of drafts in the middle so that you have the opportunity to get some feedback before you finish writing out your full assessment and so forth. But you'll want to think about if you know you're traveling over November recess, for example, you'll want to plan in advance so that you have some extra time to work with it. There's nothing that's due during that week that Cal State Fullerton is closed. Instead, you have a draft that you can submit when that breaks over, unless you want to submit it earlier so you get feedback earlier. But I combined those 2 sessions so that if you're away for the entire week or offline for the entire week, you won't be penalized in this class. You'll just want to make sure that you plan your time carefully. The other thing is I'd encourage you to make sure you take the session 11 quiz. The magic word is watermelon. That's the only thing you need to know to get 100 on the quiz. And that's in part because I found that the students who watched the module information for the last module did significantly better on their session 3 or their module 3 assessment than the students who didn't. So those of you that are here live or watching this recorded, the magic word is watermelon. Any questions? I can stick around for a bit and answer those. And then I have online office hours every Wednesday from 4 to 5. So that's the end of all of the formal things that I have to say to you. And I will stick around, answer questions. I'll keep our recording going in case the questions benefit other people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll wait so that I don't bug everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good one. I don't think other people have questions, Tara, so I'm happy to answer yours.
Okay, so one thing I have is we were trying to figure out a way of not combining, but so that this research somewhat overlaps. And so my project is on active participation strategies. That's my curriculum project, and my literature review for that was going to be about how those active participation strategies can benefit all students, and then specifically how they can benefit English language learners. My project for your class is more geared towards the changing the pacing guide, so and to the more thematic presentation. The only thing I could think of as far as including that would be within that new thematic pacing guide, using some of those strategies with the new artifacts that would be used within each of those units.
That sounds like a perfect alignment to me.
Okay, the only thing is my literature review for your project, what would that be on? Because that has, literature review on a pacing guide or more?
Well, your lit review would be on the theme. So what are the things you're looking for? What does the literature say about why teaching thematically is beneficial? And then for whatever it is you're actually building out, what are you building out? What are you reading about how to teach these topics effectively?
Oh, okay. So my literature review, so that doesn't really dovetail at all much, but
it would for the pedagogical pieces. So what you're learning would inform the actual curriculum proposal. Do you see what I mean?
No.
So let's say you're working on, for the first part of your project, you're thinking about building thematic curriculum. So your literature review is focusing on the benefits of thematic curriculum.
Thematic curriculum.
Yeah. What are the benefits of that? What are the benefits of that perhaps specifically for English learners, if that's what you're working on in your final project?
Right. But the final project is not what are the benefits of thematic teaching for English language learners. It's active participation strategies for English language learners. So those are two different literature.
Two different literature bases. So you'll look for are there places where they intersect and oh, wow, I've already read this and it's a good fit. Okay. The other thing that you may find is because you're working on, is it active learning? Is that how you're defining it for your?
Active participation strategies, the actual strategies or?
No, I was just asking what you were working towards. So then if you're thinking about building out one of those units.
For your project, right?
Yeah. So you're building out one of those units, you'll want to weave in some of the active learning strategies.
Right, that's what I figured. So for example, one of the strategies, I could use that strategy when talking about X document or whatever.
Yes.
Right. I figured that part I was able to kind of piece together. It was more trying to figure out this literature, doing two different literature reviews over Thanksgiving break. That's going to be fun.
Yes. Also, I would encourage you to get started quickly. This one is much smaller in scope. This is
how long are you expecting this one to be?
You need at least 8 sources. It's going to be 1,000. 1,000 to 1,500 words max. So that's anywhere between 4 and 6 pages.
Oh, okay. I can do that. Okay.
Yeah, it's a manageable. This is a small scale.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. And so if I do the thematic, so let me just to clarify, I think we have 8 themes. So like women, Native Americans, African Americans, industrialism, technology, there's just 8 different themes. I'll pick one of those. So I'll talk about why it's important to cover all of those 8 things.
And maybe, I would imagine almost having like a graphic that looks just like your current pacing guide.
Of what things down covered.
Yeah, here are the themes, here are the standards, that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to focus on this one theme, and here's all the stuff for that one theme.
Right, and then pick one and go, these are the artifacts that'll be used. This is the assessment that'll be used.
Yeah.
And then strategies, throw in some strategies here.
So think about what you would need to sell it to your curriculum team or sell it to your principal.
Oh, it's been sold.
So there you go. At least you're building it out, right?
It already got, that's the part. That's the hard part, because it's really, this is the hard part. To go from chronological to thematic isn't your issue. It's now how to piece together all of the information you're going to need and the documents you're going to need. And that's literally go through chapter by chapter, lesson by lesson, find all the information on this group, put it together. Now this group, put it together.
Yeah.
So that's what's the time consuming part that's going to be on this whole revision.
And And use this project to do that work. Like, don't spend your energy on this project doing work that's not real for you at school.
Right. No, this is definitely real and being used. How long it's going to take to implement it in the classroom? She wants it next year. So
Great.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. You're welcome. Have a good one.
You too.
Does anybody else have questions?
Dr. Dover, this is Steve Falcheski. I'm sorry, my camera is not
That's okay.
functioning. When I did my analysis of the DBQ project and basically figured out that it's kind of focused on one thing which matched the reason district bought it, was to deal with the complex text issues and getting things for a Common Core. And I started looking at, what are the things that are going to be added in. We need to do something for the EL learners and the differentiation for IEPs and 504s and all the different learning levels. And I'm looking at what this is what I've seen so far. I'm going to go back and watch the recording over because I missed the first about 8 or 9 minutes of this. But I'm wondering if going through and doing that is something that, one, am I going to be able to find? I'm sure I'll be able to find the literature on the differentiation issue. Is that going to be enough for this project in terms of picking out like the 4 or 5 that I looked at originally of the DBQs, the documents and the questions, and then trying to develop actual scaffolds for those DBQs to mate with ELA, not ELA, but the English language learners' needs. And
there's a huge amount of research on content area literacy and specifically content area literacy for English learners and make strategies for making document-based questions more accessible to English learners. So, it really is about, I think the challenge will be how you're defining your questions and how you're defining the process that you're engaged in, not if there's enough research out there. There are thousands and thousands of articles about these topics. And so it's about what exactly are you looking for and how are you using it. The thing that I'd suggest you think about is beginning to map out what it is you're hoping to do. And then you're welcome to email me or bring to my office hours just a rough outline of here's what I'm thinking about, and I can help you fill in some of the gaps or direct you towards some sources that might be helpful.
Okay. You doing your in-office hours on Mondays at 3?
I have in-office hours on Mondays from 1:30 to 3:30, and then online on Wednesdays from 4 to 5.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go back and start watching this over.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye, everyone. I'm going to turn off the recording and get us up online.